Hey man,
Hey, what's up?
good. How about you? How's everything over there?
Good, things are going well. Yeah, busy time of year, but otherwise, no complaints.
Good. Sorry to interrupt your holiday.
What's that?
I mean, sorry to be interrupt your day off, man.
Oh, no, you're all good. It's actually, we have a game today, so I'm in the
Oh,
office anyways, getting ready to go. So
cool. So how is COVID over there?
it's been interesting. The league's obviously had some outbreaks recently. I think we've already set a record for the most amount of call-ups in a season, and all the 10-day contracts guys are getting. But it's a really cool opportunity for all of them, to finally get some NBA experience and all that stuff. So yeah, it's been cool. As far as staffing wise, we've been fine. It's just, everybody's very precautious about, what we're doing outside of work and who we're interacting with. So
So no, you can't party, right?
yeah, no, that's a big one. Which I'm not much of a partier anyways, but yeah, it's definitely, our exposure outside of the facility in terms of going to restaurants or bars or anything like that's definitely limited now. So
Cool.
yeah.
Okay.
How are things there?
Uh, we just opened like 4 months ago,
Okay.
but the COVID is getting back.
Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, I know there's a lot of coaches know you already, but here in Taiwan, like here in Taiwan, we don't really get a chance to talk with coaches with other countries. So can you still introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Erik Huddleston. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm in my first year with the Pacers organization, so I'm an assistant with the Pacers, and then I also am the head strength coach for their G League affiliate, Fort Wayne Mad Ants. Um, so I've got, kind of both sides of that playing field. We're all under one roof, so we all operate out of the same facility. Um, like I said, it's my first season here. Before that, I was a private coach in a small gym a couple miles north here in Indianapolis called iFast. And there have been a couple other coaches who are now in the NBA that have come out of kind of that gym or the branches off that gym. So kind of felt like this was kind of where I was going to end up in terms of career, anyways. So and I always loved basketball. I grew up in the state of Indiana, so obviously basketball is a big thing here, and it has been especially, um, you know, with the Pacers organization, it's been really cool. So outside of that, I was in college basketball before that with Indiana University and Texas Tech University, and then I did my undergrad at Ball State. So
Cool.
yeah,
So how is the experience in the NBA?
it's been good. It's definitely different. Every people kind of try to generalize like what training in the NBA is like, and what I've learned quickly is that it's different organization to organization too, because there's kind of cultures set down from people in the front office and your coaching staff and all that, and the style of play that you run, and so um, I think I got scared initially into thinking that the NBA players that you work with or the professional basketball players that you work with don't necessarily like to train. They're not, big on the weight room. They don't like to be coached. And I've found that to be really not true of this environment, especially. That's credit to the people in our front office. That's credit to our GM and bringing in people who I think are, not only really, really good basketball players, but really, really good people in general. And they take this seriously. Like they really do take, what we do from a training aspect. And I struggle even, I don't like the term strength conditioning coach because I think that's really limiting. That's why, I prefer my title to be a performance coach because we are doing speed agility, we are doing correctives, we are doing like everything that I think is part of a well-rounded kind of program for them. I think that we're trying to touch on. So, we have guys here who are so receptive of that it makes it really fun. We have guys here who ask great questions, who are really, really good at, even if I don't say it, being able to relate what we're doing back to basketball. So like a lot of times they'll be, I'll get the question like, what is this doing? And then I'll have to weave that story for them of how this is going to help what they're doing from a basketball standpoint. But sometimes they can just see it. And it's great because, we're able to be as individualized as possible here. And that helps me to get a lot of buy-in with the guys that I work with. So I'm very, very fortunate. I was scared at first, to answer your question, that this was going to be a lot of me, hitting a brick wall. And it's been very, very much the opposite since I've been here. So
cool. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So it's fun now, right? It's fun.
Yeah. No, it's been great. It's yeah, it is. It is. I don't have a bad day at work, so that's
cool.
Always a good thing.
Cool. Nice. So I want to jump into the first question about like periodization or like planning for like in season and off season, especially at the level of NBA. So many games and back to back. So how do you program like training sessions for these kind of like players and this kind of schedule?
Right. I mean, periodization is great in theory. I don't know that it actually exists here. There are really, four kind of outlined athletic qualities that I look for. And so I think that as long as I'm touching on all of those all the time, then I'm kind of building out this yearly plan of, okay, this is when we kind of need to be peaking, even though, what does that even mean? Like, do I only need my athletes to be good, in the postseason? And I don't really agree with that either. So most of it, I would say, is a plan of, what are we limited in? So that gets into your testing, right? So all of these guys go through table measures. All of these guys, we have force plates here that they go through, and there's a kind of myriad of other things that they're going through from a performance testing standpoint. What are they limited in? What are those limitations going to decrease from their performance on the court, or what is it going to decrease from an availability standpoint? If we don't correct this issue, are they going to be hurt? And then how do we maximize, balance those two things out with, kind of the lowest hanging fruit. And so that makes the programming kind of easy because it is so individualized for everybody here. Like, even though they're all basketball players and they all play the same sport, they've all got different needs, especially now with going back and forth between teams, because a lot of our guys from the G League will get called up to the main team. And so I don't see them for a little bit, and then they come back down, or they're going to different NBA teams. And so I have to be really mindful of what their game minutes are. Is their conditioning being met? If they're low minute guys, is their conditioning being met outside of basketball because they don't have the court time that I would expect them to have? And then outside of for my high minute guys, am I balancing the stresses that they have from day to day to make sure that we're at least moving the needle in the direction that we need to be at the end of the day from a training standpoint? So, everybody everybody's got an asymmetry that they deal with in basketball. I don't know that I'm trying to minimize that from a training standpoint, but I do want to make them as efficient as possible within that asymmetry. And so that's where a lot of my training goes towards. And I've had a lot of experience with table measures over the years, so that's been most of what I've done and how I base that off of now. But it's cool to have some technology here that kind of supports that from a more objective training standpoint.
So you mentioned there's like force plate, that kind of stuff. So what kind of like testing you're going to use before like training athletes?
Yeah, so we really only use a counter movement jump here from a force plate standpoint. And I know that that's limiting in the fact that people say, okay, like that's clearly a jump, but it has so many other connotations to it, right? Like the eccentric portion of that jump is going to help me identify, okay, like, are they going to be good at braking? Are they going to be good at landing? Are they going to be good at the decelerative portion of a jump? Are they going to be good in decelerations on the court? So I understand it's a vertical vector and we're looking at counter movement jump that's straight up and down, but there's a lot of other ways that you can apply that. And I think that that's where people get lost in saying, you know, these are like having this big global tests that are going to be more sport specific. And I'm like, okay, like they are jumping quite a bit, but I can see where this applies in a lot of other areas. So I try to keep that in mind and understand that, you know, the left versus right differences that I'm seeing there, there's probably an explanation on the court for why I'm seeing that on the force plate also. And then, is it a problem that I need to address? So, you know, we have a great staff here that's able to, since I'm newer with this, that's able to go through the data and kind of point out things, you know, from a red flag standpoint that I would need to look at. And then that's where the creativity of your training kind of comes in, to be able to say, this is how I'm going to address that. This is where this person is at in terms of what they're comfortable with doing, because so much of this in our environment is, you know, are they, you know, I have ideals when I'm looking for a lift or when I'm looking for a program to put together. And then when I actually have the person in front of me, if they're not comfortable doing the movement that I'm asking for, I can't just force them into that exercise. I have to be able to say, okay, this is going to get me those same things, but it's going to be something that they're more comfortable with. So a lot of it's meeting them where they're at, and then you're able to make changes and as you go and kind of apply it differently, so that hopefully it gets the change that you're looking for.
Cool. Besides force plate, besides kind of movement jump, is there other tests you're gonna use?
From like a data science standpoint?
Yeah.
Not for me. You know, I think that generally is kind of the go-to right now. And again, like I'm very new with the access to technology like this. It's not something that I've had before in settings. And so, you know, we kind of have a theory here, an idea here that we don't want, you know, whatever we do from a testing standpoint to be the end all be all for decision making when it comes to training. Like, we want to still base that on the person who's in front of us. But it's good to have, you know, to be able to go to your front office and have metrics that explain, you know, where you've made progress or things to keep an eye on, because numbers make sense to some people. And again, for people who are outside of our range, I can look at an exercise and say, okay, this is not, you know, they're going to be limited in this, or I can do table measures and understand like what limited hip internal rotation looks like. For people outside of our scope, that's really, really difficult for them to be able to do. So my hope is that, you know, we continue to expand that, but I don't want it to be something that at the end of the day is an ultimate decision maker for me. So I try to have that be something that helps us correlate some things at the end of the day.
Cool. So I'm going to jump into the next topic about like multi-directional movement,
right?
Which I was like fascinated by your Instagram post. There's a lot of posts. I'm like, whoa, that was so cool and so smart. And it was so smart, man, especially for basketball, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for multi-directional movement, what kind of like, how did you design all these movement? Because there's not always gonna be like crossover or shuffle. Yeah. How do you design this?
Right. So I tried to have everything. First of all, like everything that I've posted about is probably the result of a problem that I was trying to solve at the time with a particular client or a particular athlete. So as long as you come into the like I don't try to have my Instagram or anything that I talk about be so black and white that it is that it's, you know, this is the answer to your question. I try to have those posts be something that says this could potentially help someone out there if you're able to put your own twist on it based on the people that you're working with. So really a lot of those ideas came from, I needed X, Y, and Z from somebody that I was working with, and the exercises that I had traditionally been told to do or like shown to be effective with that wasn't effective in the way that I wanted it to be. So in my mind, I had to create something or modify something to make it more effective for the people that I was working with. So that's really where a lot of that stuff came from. And then also like understanding when you talk about multi-directional movement, that in sport, multi-directional movements, when we talk about a crossover or a shuffle or a plyo step, those happen in isolation. Like I train them in a way that says, I'm going to get you really comfortable with this and we're going to repeat it over and over again, with the understanding that you probably, if you're doing a shuffle in a game more than twice, you've already got beat by whoever you're guarding, right? Like they're not meant to be these extended movements, but to teach somebody how to do something like that efficiently, they have to be. Like you have to be able to have it be repeatable. That's what reps are about in anything that we do from a performance standpoint. So once you get them comfortable with that, it's like, okay, how do you build these out to be, and again, we're never going to be game specific, but the way that we train in the weight room or the way that we train on the court, but how do I get this to be as reactionary? How do I build this up to be as fluid as possible for them in a way that I like the way that it looks and that I know that they're going to be able to perform well with?
Cool. So, does that mean like you're probably going to watch, let's say, just for basketball, let's say the movement was a little bit different with like shuffle and crossover, so you're going to watch, let's say, maybe a crossover.
Right.
Yeah, they're gonna cut and get a layup, but the movement was a lot different than what we used to say crossover for strength and conditioning. So are you gonna like watch the video and like analyze the movement and analyze what the athlete needs and to like design what is best for him?
Potentially. I mean, that's an option that I have, right? Like we're very fortunate to have, technology in the arenas that allows us to watch game film. And obviously with social media now, we get a lot of different angles on everything. So I'm able to do stuff like that. From a standpoint, even with the technology that we have on our iPhones now, like I'm able to take video and slow things down on my own. So that is definitely. Cut out.
Okay, it's okay.
Sorry about that. I think early on that technology really helps because your eye for coaching, everything has to be slowed down, right? Especially when we're talking about change of direction, speed, agility work, like that. All that stuff doesn't come quickly until you have a lot of reps in it. So being able to have a lot of reps in what I was doing and be able to see that now, I don't have to break down film as much as I used to have to. It's really great for demonstrating to guys, like for if I'm able to take a video and show the guys, look, this is where I think that whatever drill we're doing is going to be most effective for you, then that tends to help. So it's been cool to be able to have some access to some stuff here that's able to help explain things better to guys who maybe are interested in what you're doing, but are going to be more interested when you're able to show them exactly what it's going to do for them. Cool.
So there's a lot. I mean, this question also came from the post on Instagram. So there's a lot of like posts, a lot of video you post is like a little bit like band assisted. Like band assisted, like lunge, band assisted, like landing.
Right.
Yeah. So why is there like band assisted eccentric?
Right. Love that question because this gets overlooked a lot, especially when we are such a, and I say we like as in our industry. We are so output driven when it comes to the performance training that we do, right? Like everything is about producing force or being able to jump high or being able to do this and that is an output driven result. Where I think that we overlook a lot of things is the input side of things. So being able to interact with the ground well, being able to land well, being able to absorb force, being able to not necessarily absorb is a bad word, being able to redirect force. So being able to hit the ground in a landing and be able to transfer that into the first step of our sprint and have that not, I mean, from an injury standpoint, right? Like have that not tear through our tissues, have that not cause any issue like that, but also from an efficiency standpoint, to be able to load a muscle or connective tissue and be able to express that on the output side. It not only are you likely improving the health of that athlete, but you're probably improving the performance at the same time, because as their efficiency goes up, their output typically goes up also. And now they're able to handle those new stresses and the new force that they're able to create. So I think those two things go really hand in hand. I think that's where a lot of times in our industry, you'll hear stuff about, well, if you eliminate or reduce their compensation, like we all talk about compensation and how people get tasks done here. And if you reduce their compensation, you're going to reduce their output. And I don't think that's necessarily true for everybody. I think you have just as much of a chance of increasing their output by reducing compensation as you do for the flip side of that, by actually, maintaining the compensation. So that's what's hard is that it's all kind of this test and retest after you intervene type of approach for things. So yeah, the band assisted stuff is going to help them de-weight. So as they hit the ground or whatever they're doing, if we're talking about band assisted jumps, it's helping them get back off the ground quickly. So it's limiting their ground contact time. It's reducing the force that they have to put, or that they have to transfer through the ground. It's reducing the impact on their knees, which is a big thing. Like if I'm going to jump guys now when we're in the middle of our season, I better be able to maintain that the output end is high, but that I'm also getting quality in terms of the force redistribution portion of that. So that's what's really creative and really fun about the job that I have now, is that I'm able to still balance the outputs and the inputs at the same time and have them manage those well.
So is the concept like the pyramid you post on your Instagram?
Yeah, that's been a big time thing for me. It is being able to have, so originally where that came from, so I worked for a brilliant guy named Bill Hartman at iFast. If you guys haven't heard of him, you should definitely look him up. But I was probably in my first 3 months working there. So I was fresh out of school, really hadn't had any clients to that point. And I had a Division I college basketball player come in who had been post-op on a meniscus tear and hadn't had any contact or hadn't had any training, reintroduction to sport for 13 months. So it'd been over a year that he had been out of sport. And so we kind of talked about, how do you introduce, where do you start? How do you start training somebody who basically hasn't done anything active besides, shooting shots on the ground, free throws, for 13 months and get them to a point where they're going to be able to play, really high level Division I basketball? And so Bill talked about kind of the 4 stages of introducing someone back into athletics, or even making sure that you're checking off all of these boxes in terms of your training. So where that starts at, in the base of that pyramid, is accepting force, learning how to accept force. And that comes from both ends, right? That comes from an end that says there are some people who are too overcome by gravity, right? So they're already too susceptible to load impacting where their body goes already. So they need to learn how to accept force in a way that allows them to fight gravity, to be able to stand up against load, to be able to be output driven. And there are some people who are so output driven, they also need to learn how to accept force in a way that keeps their tissue supple, that allows them not to blow through an ACL, that allows them to make a landing on the ground and have that force be distributed evenly through their pelvis and their diaphragm. So when you have, looking at it from both of those angles, then okay, if you've checked that box off, and that view has changed for me now that I have some numbers to back this stuff up, but once you've checked that box off as a coach of saying, okay, this person I think can accept force well, now it's create force. And then those build on each other and return to sport and say, now you have to be able to create force quickly. So we're looking at stuff like RFD and how they're able to generate force. And then if they're able to create force quickly, repeatedly is the final part of that pyramid, because now we're able to say that is sport, right? That's running, that's cutting, that's landing and transitioning into another movement, is being able to create force quickly. So as long as those four things, are stacked well on top of each other, and we're constantly revisiting those things. And again, revisiting those things for each individual athlete is going to be different. If we've got somebody here who really, really struggles with accepting force off the bat, that's going to appear in their programming more often than it would for somebody who doesn't have as much of an issue with that portion of the layout. So that's kind of how I approach that, and that's kind of how I use that pyramid. But it really applies not just in kind of the return to play stuff, but to anybody that I work with.
Yeah. So can I understand it this way? The accept force is more like eccentric.
Yeah.
And accept for and create force probably like iso then concentric.
Yes. So yeah, then it turns, that's probably more where it looks like. And again, you can use, it depends on how you're using an isometric, right? Like if I'm doing a yielding isometric, so I'm letting the load hold me at a certain point.
That's accept force.
That is right. That is very, so I mean, first of all, there's no such thing as an isometric muscle contraction, right? Like a muscle is either going to contract and shorten, or it's going to lengthen. So when I talk about an isometric, you're going to be somewhere on either end of that spectrum. You're going to be eccentrically loading a muscle or concentrically loading a muscle, but it's how you're coaching that is really which end of that you're going towards. Because I can make isometrics be more force production, or I can make them much more yielding in the fact that they're going to be accepting force on that. So depends.
Cool. Love it. So you talk about, like, earlier in our conversation, you talk about redirecting force.
Yeah.
How to like redirect force?
It depends on where they're starting at. So if they're starting at a point where, let's say, let's use like the language that you use. So like eccentric orientation. If we're starting with somebody who is very biased towards eccentric orientation, they're going to have a hard time redirecting force upwards, because generally things are weighing on them very heavily. These are people who aren't, if you look at somebody who's eccentrically oriented or has a bias for that, they're not going to be biased towards force production right off the bat. So from an athletic standpoint, they're going to be heavy-footed. They're going to be low force output in terms of what their jump height looks like. They're going to be generally slow-looking. And if you can identify that, then how they accept force, they have to learn how to limit the effect that downward force has on them then. So they have to be able to find that basement that says, okay, in my squat, this is going to be as low as I allow myself to go, rather than getting buried at the bottom of this like I normally would. So maybe that's where we introduce a box squat. So we say, this is like, I give them a hard stop. This is where we're going to stop this time. And they're not allowed to go any lower than that. So you start to create that baseline that says, okay, I'm going to be able to accept this, but it's on my terms instead of the terms that I've been on before that just say I'm going to be floppy and fall to the ground. The other end of that is someone who is too concentrically oriented, let's say, to accept force well, so they don't have any vertical displacement of their pelvis when they start to squat. So it looks like a hinge, or they can't, unless you load the bar up with 400 pounds, you're not able to get to the bottom of your squat because you're not able to load that properly. So it depends on where you start from, but that's kind of what that looks like in terms of those two kind of very contrast starting points, is that either they need to learn where the basement is, or they need to find the basement to begin with.
Cool. So, last question from the Instagram post is like, for all those like movement you post, it's not like there's a paper or there's a research to like prove you're right. So how to like convince your player or convince the coaching staff to believe in you?
Right. Yeah, that's tough. And I think that is, that in my setting right now is very results driven. First and foremost, like, if I'm able to do something that looks odd with a player and have them buy into it because of the feel that they get from it, or the change of performance that they feel once they've done that, because usually our things build, right? Like I have them maybe like hold a position, so we're doing something more static to build a sensation, and then I have them like the next exercise right behind that might be something that is that's got a little bit more movement, but is re-emphasizing the feeling that I was trying to make in the first exercise. And then the third exercise that I couple with that might be the most dynamic version of what I'm looking for with that. So I kind of build it out like that. And as long as they're able to see where that last one goes in terms of basketball, like how that's going to affect them, then the second exercise and the first exercise also have a little bit of buy-in from them on that. So the big argument now is, like you mentioned research, like if I'm going to base everything that I do on research, I'm going to be 2 years behind constantly. And I know that that's hard for a lot of people to hear, but it's true. Like, you know, the papers that are being published right now were started as, you know, thesis or ideas. They were started 2 years ago. So we have to be comfortable with the fact that not everything that we do is always going to be backed by a paper, and that you work with the individual in front of you. There's nothing that's off the table for me in terms of training modalities. Like I think when I was younger, I used to go towards camps really heavily, if that makes sense. Like I used to be like, oh, like so-and-so, like that's an awful way to think about something. Or, you know, this, you know, static stretching, that's a big thing, you know, back in the day. It's like static stretching is either, you know, the best thing ever or it's terrible. And, you know, depending on the research that you look at, it's going to kind of determine what your thought process is with that. But, nowadays it's like everything is on the table because I've got so many different types of people that I work with right now. And if something is effective with them, and I can explain it to them in a way that gets them buy-in, then I think that it works, right? Like it's all about being adaptable and being able to be a good problem solver for the person that you're working with at the time. So I don't think everything needs to be, you know, necessarily backed by research. I don't think that everything that we do in PT or everything that we do in medicine is really backed in research, you know, as often as we'd like to think it is. So as long as I keep that mindset, and you know, the people in this organization, I've been really fortunate because I have a lot of autonomy here to be able to do what I want and be able to try out the things that I want to try out. And they trust me to do that. And so I think that if you surround yourself with people who are like that, then generally you don't have to answer those questions as often in terms of what you're doing, because, you know, the newer exercises that I introduce to the guys that I work with here, like they love having stuff that is new, meant for them. Yeah, they love having stuff that's new and that's meant for them, right? Like if there's nobody else in the room doing it, they generally like that type of thing because they know, like they crave something that is going to help them in the long run. And so as long as they know that you've taken time to think through something and they trust kind of your eye on something like that, then I don't really have any problems with stuff like that.
Cool, man. Love it. So yeah. So is there like any time you're like the athlete didn't buy into what you're like teaching them?
Man, you know what? I've been really, really fortunate. So you know, I'm biased in this because I came from the private sector. So, you know, I would have people who paid me to work with me, so they didn't really question a lot of what I did. And then the athletes that I have now are so, they are so good, like I said, at asking questions. And I think as soon as they understand that I've hopefully when I prescribe an exercise, I've thought out all the questions that they could have. And so when you look at it that way, like I've probably already thought of what they're going to think of, because I can kind of put myself in their shoes and say, this is what I see this exercise helping, or these are where I see the questions popping up. So I don't really have an issue with guys. More often than not, I have, this exercise doesn't feel right, or this doesn't, like, I don't feel like doing this today. What's something else that we could do that would get me the same result, but that doesn't, is not this modality? And so that's where being creative and having a large exercise library on my end helps to be able to do that kind of thing, because I've had experience being like, okay, I have an ideal of what I would like to put on their program. Maybe that's not what they feel like doing today. So what do I do that's going to help them, still get what they need to get, but isn't going to be that thing that they don't like doing? So I don't get a lot of pushback, but if it happens, like, look, this is their career at the end of the day. Like, I am a facilitator of each player's own individual brand. And if I can't meet them where they're at every day, like, I probably shouldn't be in this job, because it is really about making sure that they feel like they are ready to perform on the basketball court all the time. Because, like you said, our games are pretty frequent at this point. So, I need to make sure that they're ready for what they're going to do on the court, not necessarily my ego determining what we're going to do in the weight room.
There's a call.
You're good. You're good.
So, if there's like for coaches out there who want to learn like new stuff, and I mean like learn from your Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
So is there like anything you want to like say to them?
Just have an open mind. I think that so many times, we align ourselves with a belief system, and we hold to that like it's the only truth that we know. And I think that there's a lot more gray area in our industry than there is black and white. I think that if you are a young coach and you are convinced that, this way of doing things is the only way to do things, you're probably limiting yourself and learning a lot of cool stuff. So, I just recommend that people keep their minds, open to new ideas. I think that being as creative as possible and always trying things out on yourself before you try to come up with something for an athlete is important. First of all, you have to be able to demonstrate, the things that you're trying to prescribe to somebody. So make sure that you can do it yourself. But yeah, play around with new ideas, try new takes on things. As long as you have reasoning for the exercise that you're putting together or the program that you're putting together, I think that you're probably good. Like, if you're just throwing stuff in because it looks cool, or because you've seen it on Instagram, or because you have, you feel like you have to have, 2 pulls for every push exercise, like the NSCA says. If you feel like you're just throwing things in the pot, have a reason for what you're doing. Like, have a root cause of what you're trying to implement. You could be wrong, but learn from that experience.
Yeah, man. It's like everyone was, when we talk about like in-season training, everyone's like mid-thigh pull, quarter squat, or like whatever. It's so boring, but yeah, from Bush Schexnayder, I heard it from him, and he said he's gonna do some max plyo. I think that was cool, and probably some ISO. That was cool. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but from your Instagram, from your post, I would love to like put some of those things into my in-season training. And I think that was cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, you asked about periodization off the top, and like, I have to look at this on my end because of the variability of our schedule and how often I'm able to see guys. Like, there are some weeks when I might have 4 or 5 lifts, like actual training sessions, there are other weeks when I'm lucky if we get 2 formal training sessions or 1 formal training session. So you have to be I have to be kind of microdosing in terms of the way that I present that to everybody. But a lot of it is just vertical integration from like Charlie Francis, right? Like it's being able to say, we need to hit the stuff that is going to be really, really neurally fatiguing these amount of days per week, or we need to be able to hit these qualities this amount of times per week. And so that's where the programming comes in, is being able to say, okay, it's been a minute since we've done, a 10-meter sprint at a max effort. So like, let's get that on the court today and make sure that we're hitting some of these things that we haven't been able to hit since we've been out of the weight room. So that's kind of where my mind in terms of how I periodize training works, because having an ultimate plan really doesn't work when you get guys that have as many games as they have, or they're playing and they're not playing, or they have a knee issue or something like that. So it's all about being adaptable.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So last question, okay? So how do you monitor fatigue and to put in the best stuff you think it is for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of it is really subjective in the fact that I talk to our players a lot. So, I see them basically every day. I have a great relationship with our sports medicine staff. So, if they're seeing me on a day for a training session, they're also seeing somebody for treatment that day, or they're seeing somebody. So, we have a meeting every morning that provides us with some context from the sports medicine side of what they've seen with an athlete. And then it's just talking to the athlete themselves. So how do you think that how have you been feeling? Like, what are some areas that we need to keep improving on? And I think that those are a little bit more helpful, because our force plate testing happens 1 time a week. So think about all the variables that go into, what day of the week that is. Like, have we just come off a game the day before? Have we just had 2 training sessions for the 2, consecutive days before? So there's a lot of context into that. And you can say, they can pull red flags on those force plate numbers that say, someone's, looking a little fatigued, we probably need to address this. But overall, workload management, that's going to depend on the style of play that we, the team that we played the night before. If they're a more fast-paced game, that workload per minute is going to go up, and vice versa if we play a slower-paced team. So I don't know that you can necessarily, unless you've had a guy for a couple of years and you can say you have some markers on their load that says, okay, every 4th game we start to have this issue with their knee. So let's monitor that, which is a luxury at this level, right? Because guys move around from team to team a lot. I think that it's hard to make those correlations. So really just having that conversation with the guys every day when they're in, to be able to say, how are you feeling? I really love Daniel Bove's quadrant system. So Daniel Bove from the New Orleans Pelicans, I love his book Quadrant Systems, because it really makes that idea of training high volume, high intensity on your high sport demand days, and then low on your low days. So I use that concept a lot. And so if they've really had a tough day the day before, and I know that from a practice standpoint it's going to be a little slower on the next day, that next day for me is going to be a low output, kind of a more restorative day also. So I try to balance that out with their schedule also.
Well, what was the book again?
It's called Quadrant System. I might have it in my bag. It's by Daniel Bove. The Quadrant System. So I would check it out. It's a great little read. It makes a lot of sense, and I think that you just have to be able to apply it in your setting.
Okay, so that's kind of all the question I have for today. And the last time I watched the Pacer game, it was Richard Miller was still playing.
Hey, but that was a great time to watch.
But from today, I'm gonna start watching it. Okay.
There you go. You better. Yeah. Yeah. We play the Celtics tonight, so.
Okay, I'm gonna watch it.
There you go.
See you, man. I hope probably after the season, I would love to invite you and talk to you again. Okay, is that okay for you?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Love it, man. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Erik. Yeah, appreciate it, man.
See you.
See you, bud.